In this video, we're exploring 50 surprising and little-known facts about Jackie Kennedy-Onassis, not as a fashion plate, but as a complicated, highly intelligent woman whose life was much stranger and more revealing than the Camelot story ever allowed. You're watching Cultured Elegance. Be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below telling me which fact surprised you the most. Early life, family, and the making of Jax. Jacqueline Lee Bouvier was born on July 28, 1929, at Southampton Hospital on Long Island, in the middle of high summer in the Hamptons. She was the first child of John Blackjack Bouvier III, a handsome, unreliable Wall Street stockbroker, and Janet Norton Lee, an ambitious, exquisitely controlled society girl. From the very beginning, Jackie's world was a blend of horses, house parties, and unspoken tension. Her parents liked to present her Bouvier side as near aristocratic. Jack's father had even compiled a huge genealogical book, claiming French noble roots and revolutionary heroes in the family. Later research showed that the Bouvier were in fact successful third-generation French immigrants. Respectable, yes, but not quite the dukes and marquises they liked to imagine. Jackie grew up inside a family that had already learned how to bend the truth into a better-looking story. Summers meant Lasata, the Bouvier estate in East Hampton, with its elm-lined drive, clipped lawns, and stables. There, Jackie's life centered on animals. The family kept a small menagerie of dogs, with names like Hoochie, Sister, Tally-Ho, Caprice, and a towering Great Dane called King Far. But horses ruled everything. Janet was a fiercely competitive horsewoman, and almost from toddlerhood, she placed Jackie on a pony and expected her to ride with poise. Horses became Jackie's first great love and her first stage. By 11, she had already won a national junior horsemanship competition, prompting the New York Times to note that this small girl from East Hampton had pulled off a rare double victory. For the rest of her life, riding wasn't just a hobby. It was the one place where she could physically escape the drama of her parents' marriage and feel completely in control. She later summed up her childhood in one wonderfully frank description. "I lived in New York City until I was 13 and spent the summers in the country. I hated dolls, loved horses and dogs, and had skinned knees and braces on my teeth for what must have seemed an interminable length of time to my family." Books were her second great love. Jackie remembered how, during nap time, she would sneak over to the windowsill with volumes of Chekhov and Shaw from the family shelves, and read instead of sleeping. Before the nurse returned, she would scrub the soles of her feet, so there'd be no proof she'd been out of bed. Her childhood heroes weren't princesses. They were Byron, Mowgli, Robin Hood, little Lord Fauntleroy's formidable grandfather, and Scarlett O'Hara. That list alone tells you almost everything about the kind of woman she would become. Jackie's younger sister, Caroline Lee, always called Lee, was born in 1933, and from the start their relationship mixed intense affection with quiet rivalry. The girls were often dressed alike and called by pet names. Jackie was Jax, Lee was Peeks. They shared nurseries, ponies, and summers at Lasata. Yet Lee later said she realized, even as a child, that both parents favored Jackie, her father for her riding, her mother for her looks and promise. Jackie was special. Lee said simply, "I wasn't." Their father adored his daughters, but his love did not restrain his vices. Blackjack gambled, drank, and chased women, often publicly enough to make the newspapers. Jackie and Lee saw their parents' marriage deteriorate while still very young. In 1936, when Jackie was 7, her parents separated. By 1940, they were divorced, and the girls' childhood was split in two: glamour and indulgence with their father, rules and criticism with their mother. Life with Janet could veer from brittle elegance to explosive anger. Biographers, drawing heavily on Lee's memories, describe sudden rages, where Janet would slap the girls with the palm, and then the back of her hand. Hours later, remorseful, she would summon them into the kitchen for peace offerings. Homemade butterscotch pudding with canned whipped cream, a treat she herself had loved as a child. The girls, still stung and wary, often refused at first, then gradually accepted, a rhythm of hurt and reconciliation that shaped both sisters' understanding of love. Despite the volatility, Lee would later say that their early years were the time we were closest, when Jackie called her peaks and protected her. Childhood gave them a shared language. Adulthood would test it. Jackie's looks as a girl were striking, but not yet glamorous. She had a square little face under thick dark hair, large brown eyes that seemed to study everything, and an athletic, wiry frame from riding and outdoor play. In family photographs, she alternates between impish grins and a watchful seriousness, the combination of mischief and guardedness that would become her signature. School, Paris, and the making of a mind. Academically, Jackie was strong, especially in literature and languages. At Miss Porter's school in Farmington, Connecticut, she wrote essays and poems, contributed to the school paper, and won the top literature prize in her senior year. One teacher called her very clever, very artistic, and full of the devil. Hardly the bland finishing school girl the world might have expected. In 1947, when she came out into New York society, she was named Debutante of the Year by a major newspaper columnist. While other girls wore couture, Jackie appeared in a comparatively simple gown and still stole the column inches. It was a hint of what would come later. She didn't need the loudest dress to dominate the room. On paper, her next step looked conventional. Vassar College, where she studied history, literature, art, and French. In reality, she spent as much time escaping to New York as she did in class. She wanted seriousness, but she also wanted a bigger world than campus rituals. After her junior year studying in France, an experience she later said she loved more than any year of her life, she transferred to George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and finished her degree in French literature there. Paris changed her. She wrote that being away from home gave me a chance to look at myself with a jaundiced eye, and that she finally stopped being ashamed of her hunger for knowledge. She came back with a lifelong devotion to French language and culture, and a sense that Europe would always tug at her imagination. Not long after, Jackie entered Vogue's prestigious Prix de Paris contest, which challenged college women to submit ideas and essays. She won, beating over 1,000 other entrants, and was offered a year split between Vogue's New York and Paris offices. It was the perfect bridge between fashion and writing, and then she walked away. After only a day in the office, an editor advised her to go home, warning that life there might swallow her whole. Jackie, ever pragmatic, gave up the prize and returned to Washington. Instead, she took a job that would train her in something even more valuable: listening. In 1951, she became the inquiring camera girl for the Washington Times-Herald. Every day she roamed the Capitol with a camera, stopping strangers to ask them questions about politics, money, marriage, and social issues, and then pairing their pictures with short, witty write-ups. Among those she interviewed was Richard Nixon, the man her future husband would later defeat for the presidency. The job did 3 things for her at once. It got her used to approaching anyone. It forced her to shape other people's words into neat little stories. And it showed her, up close, how ordinary Americans thought. For someone who would later be accused of being detached from real life, it was a quietly radical education. Engagements, hesitation, and marrying into power. Now, before John F. Kennedy, there was another John. In early 1952, the Society pages announced Jackie's engagement to John Husted Jr., a Yale graduate, World War II veteran, and Wall Street banker. She was 22. The match seemed ideal. Handsome, respectable, and safely within her social world. Then, within weeks, she called it off. Some biographers suggest that as wedding plans progressed, Jackie realized his ambitions were more limited than her own. Life as Mrs. Husted would mean comfort and predictability. Jackie wanted something bigger. Breaking the engagement so publicly was risky and humiliating in her social circle. But she did it anyway, a quiet hint that she would not choose safety over the life she wanted. Only a few months later, she met Congressman John F. Kennedy at a dinner party in Georgetown. He was young, handsome, war hero famous, and already being talked about as a future president. They shared a background in Catholic East Coast families, a love of books, and a sense of irony about their own worlds. At first, she was more amused than smitten. He, famously, leaned across the asparagus and asked her out. Their courtship was irregular, interrupted by his political obligations and her assignments as a journalist, including traveling to Europe to cover the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. Yet slowly, the relationship solidified. After he proposed, Jackie hesitated again, reportedly wanting to complete her assignment in London before accepting. She eventually said yes, and in September 1953, they married in Newport, Rhode Island, in a wedding so lavish that it made front-page news across the country. The day was not quite the fairy tale it appeared. Her beloved father, Black Jack, who had long dreamed of walking her down the aisle, was too drunk and demoralized from marital and financial disasters to do it. Her stepfather, Hugh Auchincloss, escorted her instead. Jackie kept her composure, but according to family accounts, she never forgot the humiliation he had been maneuvered into. Another reminder that the people she loved could not always be relied upon. First Lady in training, illness, loss, and the liability. A marriage to Jack introduced Jackie to a new kind of instability, not financial, but physical and emotional. Beneath his vigorous public image, Jack Kennedy was chronically ill. He suffered from severe back problems, Addison's disease, and a string of other ailments that required steroids, painkillers, and careful management. On their honeymoon, Jackie saw the full extent of his medical regimen and realized just how fragile the man who seemed indestructible to the public really was. Their early married years brought both joys and heartbreak. Jackie endured a miscarriage in 1955 and a stillborn daughter in 1956, later privately named Arabella. Caroline was born in 1957, then John Jr. in November 1960, just after Jack won the presidency. In August 1963, their son Patrick was born prematurely and died 2 days later. By the time she was 34, Jackie had given birth to 4 children and buried 2 of them. Jack's infidelities, with socialites, actresses, and even members of the White House staff, are now well documented. Jackie was not naive. She learned of some of these affairs early and made her own accommodations. Friends recall flashes of a dry, devastating wit when his behavior was discussed, but publicly she maintained silence. Divorce was unthinkable in their world. Instead, she learned to carve out a separate mental space for herself, something between loyalty and emotional self-protection. Privately, she sometimes felt that Jack viewed her as more of a liability than an asset in politics. In her recorded 1964 conversations with historian Arthur Schlesinger Jr., she recalled that before the presidency, he worried that her shyness and love of privacy might hurt him. Ironically, once they were in the White House, her international popularity and elegance became one of his greatest strengths. Her own view of the role was blunt. I think the major role of the First Lady is to take care of the president so that he can best serve the people. That line, often quoted, shows how clearly she understood the hierarchy she lived inside, and how willing she was, at least publicly, to stay within it. On the White House, restoration, culture, and quiet power. When Jackie arrived at the White House in 1961, she was disappointed. The rooms were comfortable, but generic, filled with modern pieces and borrowed furniture with little historical meaning. She decided the president's house should feel like a living museum of American history. Everything in the White House must have a reason for being there, she insisted. It would be sacrilege merely to redecorate it. It must be restored. She quickly exhausted her official's $50,000 budget and then set about quietly raising funds and persuading collectors to donate historically significant pieces. She created a fine arts committee to advise on acquisitions and began tracking down objects owned by Washington, Madison, Lincoln, and other presidents. The result was a White House that finally looked like the seat of a long republic instead of a grand hotel. In February 1962, Jackie unveiled her work to the nation in a televised White House tour hosted by CBS's Charles Collingwood. Viewers saw a soft-spoken First Lady guiding the camera through newly restored rooms, explaining historical details with quiet authority. The special attracted an audience of around 56 million people, an enormous number at the time, and earned her an honorary Emmy Award. She did something else unusual with the White House. She filled it with artists. At state dinners, alongside diplomats and generals, she placed writers, musicians, and scientists. Violinist Isaac Stern later wrote to her that the attention she gave to the arts at the White House was one of the most exciting developments on the present American cultural scene. For Jackie, culture wasn't decoration. It was part of what a great nation should display to itself and to the world. To protect Caroline from the glare of press and security concerns, Jackie turned the White House solarium on the third floor into a little school. She invited other children, many from Kennedy staff families, and brought in professional teachers and even classroom pets. At a time when the presidency was becoming more public than ever, she carved out a small protected world for her daughter just under the roof. Her languages were another quiet source of influence. Fluent in French and highly competent in Spanish and Italian, Jackie could move through state visits and diplomatic dinners with an ease that astonished foreign hosts. In France, crowds adored her. After their 1961 visit, President Kennedy jokingly introduced himself as the man who accompanied Jacqueline Kennedy to Paris. In Louisiana and Texas, she switched into French and Spanish on the campaign trail, thrilling audiences unused to hearing a First Lady speak to them in their own tongue. Cuban Missile Crisis and the Edge of the World. In October 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, Jackie confronted the possibility that her husband and the entire country could be wiped out by nuclear war. Advisors urged evacuation plans for her and the children. She refused. In the Schlesinger tapes, she recalled telling Jack, "If anything happens, we're all going to stay right here with you. I just want to be with you, and I want to die with you, and the children do too, then live without you." It is one of the darkest, most startling things she ever said on record. It reveals a woman who understood herself not as an ornament to history, but as someone so bound up with a single person and moment that she could not imagine life beyond it. In a way, that line is the emotional prelude to Dallas. Dallas, the Pink Suit, and the Making of Camelot. On November 22, 1963, Jackie put on a strawberry pink Chanel-style suit with a navy collar and matching pillbox hat. The outfit was chosen deliberately, bright enough to look friendly in Texas while still formal enough for a First Lady. She sat beside the president in the open limousine as they drove through Dealey Plaza in Dallas, and then, in seconds, her life was split in two. After the shots, witnesses saw her crawl onto the back of the speeding car. At Parkland Hospital, she stayed beside his body, still wearing the blood-spattered suit. When staff suggested she change, she refused. On the flight back to Washington, she stood next to Lyndon Johnson as he took the oath of office, her stockinged legs streaked with blood, her suit stiff with it. When asked again if she wanted fresh clothes, she reportedly answered, "Oh no, I want them to see what they have done to Jack." That suit, uncleaned, is now stored in the U.S. National Archives. Under a deed from Caroline Kennedy, it will not be available for public display or research until at least the year 2013. The matching pillbox hat, oddly, disappeared that day and has never been found. Even in death, Jackie controlled what the world could and could not see. In the raw days after the assassination, Jackie spiraled into grief that frightened those around her. Friends and clergy who spoke with her later described a young widow who was quietly searching for meaning and comfort, trying to understand how to move forward after such a devastating loss. To the country, she appeared as a stoic young widow in a black veil. In private, she was wrestling with whether life without Jack was bearable. Yet within a week, she performed one of the most extraordinary acts of narrative control in modern history. She invited journalist Theodore White to the Kennedy compound in Hyannisport, and in a late-night interview for Life magazine, gave him the frame that would define her husband's presidency forever, Camelot. Jack, she said, loved the Broadway musical, and often played its cast recording. She quoted the lyric, "Don't let it be forgot," that once there was a spot, for one brief, shining moment, that was known as Camelot, and told White she wanted people to remember his presidency that way. "There will be great presidents again," she added, "but there will never be another Camelot." With that single line, a grieving 34-year-old widow turned a short administration into a permanent legend. Ironically, for a woman who would later say, "I want to live my life, not record it," she left one of the most enduring recordings of all, a myth the country has never quite stopped believing. Jackie's philosophy, children, privacy, and culture. In the years after Dallas, Jackie condensed her priorities into a single sentence: "If you bungle raising your children, I don't think whatever else you do matters very much." That quote, repeated often, wasn't a pretty slogan. It was a kind of personal theology. Having seen how power and public life could devour people, she decided that her real job was to get Caroline and John Jr. safely through it. She became fiercely protective of their privacy, pushing back against intrusive photographers, insisting on as normal a childhood as possible, and reportedly vetoing certain risks, including small private planes, while she was alive. Some friends later said that when John Jr. died in a plane crash in 1999, they were haunted by how determined she had been to prevent exactly that scenario. Her view of fame was equally ruthless. "I never wanted fame," she is quoted as saying. "I just happened to marry a man who was destined for it." In another line, she put it even more starkly: "I want to live my life, not record it." In an era obsessed with documenting itself, and in a life that had been photographed from debut to death, those words sound almost prophetic. She was also deeply worried about what television was doing to culture. "Our culture will become like it was during the medieval times when there truly was a cultural elite," she warned in one interview. "The rest of the people will just watch television." Coming from someone who became one of TV's defining images, that warning feels especially sharp. Her answer to that problem, at least in her own sphere, was simple: books. "There are many little ways to enlarge your child's world. Love of books is the best of all," she said. It's a line that perfectly links the pony-mad Chekhov-reading child at Lasata to the editor she later became in New York. Onassis, scandal, and reinvention. 5 years after Jack's assassination, another blow struck: the murder of Robert F. Kennedy in 1968. Jackie had campaigned for him and saw in him not only a brother-in-law, but a protector. After his death, she became convinced that the Kennedy family was a permanent target. Some biographers believe that this fear was a major factor in her decision, later that year, to marry Greek shipping magnate Aristotle Onassis. a man whose wealth and security apparatus could insulate her children in ways American politics no longer could. The marriage shocked the American public. To many, it looked like a betrayal of JFK's memory. Tabloids gleefully rechristened her Jackie O. Onassis was older, divorced, and notorious in his own way. Yet for Jackie, the union brought something she had not had since childhood: physical safety, financial independence that didn't depend on the goodwill of a political machine, and a certain anonymity in Europe. The relationship itself was far from a fairy tale. Accounts from friends and staff describe arguments, separations, and resentments on both sides. Onassis could be overbearing. Jackie could be quietly immovable. Still, the marriage provided a bridge from widowhood in Washington to a new life in New York. When he died in 1975, she was widowed for the second time, but she was also free to become something she had wanted to be long before the White House: an editor. Jackie the editor, manuscripts, not microphones. In her mid-40s, Jackie did something many women only talk about. She started a completely new career. She joined Viking Press in New York as an editor, then moved to Doubleday, where she remained for the rest of her life. Colleagues say she showed up at the office like any other staff member, reading submissions on the subway, marking up manuscripts, and making notes in a tidy, distinctive hand. She worked on a surprisingly wide range of books: memoirs, children's titles, histories, novels, and major projects like Michael Jackson's autobiography, Moonwalk. One author recalled how she swept into a meeting, called her the writer with theatrical enthusiasm, and then proceeded to give frank, line-by-line criticism, all delivered with charm, but also with unmistakable authority. Jackie once said, half joking, "An editor becomes kind of your mother." Coming from her, with her complicated memories of Janet, that line is particularly revealing. In publishing, she could be the kind of demanding, fiercely supportive mother she might have wished she'd had, coaxing, pushing, protecting the work, but also giving it the brutal honesty it needed. Her colleagues at Doubleday have said that by the 1980s she was at the top of her game professionally, and that many authors initially came for the famous name, but stayed because she was a genuinely insightful editor. It is one of the more surprising facts of her life. Almost a third of it was spent not in front of cameras, but behind stacks of paper. A privacy, lawsuits, and the price of being Jackie O. Even as she tried to build a quieter life in New York, Jackie remained a magnet for paparazzi. The most relentless of them was Ron Galella, a photographer who followed her and her children obsessively through the streets, snapping photos as they walked, rode bikes, or left their apartment. Eventually, Jackie took him to court, accusing him of harassment and invasion of privacy. She won. A judge issued an order requiring Galella to stay a set number of feet away from her and her children, a rare legal victory for a celebrity against a photographer at that time. He famously began carrying a tape measure to ensure he didn't technically violate the ruling, but the case sent a clear message. Jackie was willing to use the law, not just dark glasses, to defend her boundaries. Her broader philosophy of dealing with public attention can be summed up in a rule she was said to live by: never complain, never explain. It's a phrase often associated with her later years in New York, a kind of stoic code for living under permanent observation without letting the observers dictate your behavior. Illness, death, and the final act. In the early 1990s, Jackie was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin lymphoma. True to form, she kept the illness mostly private, continuing to work at Doubleday and attend to her family while undergoing treatment. Only when it became clear that the cancer was terminal did she return to her Fifth Avenue apartment to spend her final days. She died there on May 19, 1994, at the age of 64. The official statement from her son, John Jr., was simple. She died surrounded by her friends, and her family, and her books, the things she loved. She was buried beside President Kennedy at Arlington National Cemetery, under the eternal flame she had lit for him 30 years earlier. Even in death, she had curated the details, from the readings at her funeral to the music. It was the last expression of a lifelong instinct to stage manage the narrative before anyone else could do it for her. Who Jackie really was. When you put all of these pieces together, the pony-obsessed child at Lasata, the clever schoolgirl reading Chekhov on the windowsill, the inquiring camera girl with her Graflex on Washington sidewalks, the First Lady who restored the White House and spoke in 3 languages, the woman in the pink suit, the Greek tycoon's wife, the New York editor in a cluttered office, Jackie becomes less of an icon and more of a person. She was philosophical about grief. One must not let oneself be overwhelmed by sadness, she said, and coming from her, it feels less like advice and more like a personal emergency exit. She was unsentimental about success. If you bungle raising your children, I don't think whatever else you do matters very much. And she was brutally clear about her own relationship to fame. I want to live my life, not record it. The irony, of course, is that we have been recording it ever since. I thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to explore Jackie's world more deeply, I've linked my most recommended biographies and sources in the description below. Let me know in the comments which fact changed the way you see her, or which chapter of her story you'd like me to cover in a future video. If you'd like to support the channel, you'll also find links to memberships and my newsletter there as well. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who loves history and elegance.